If Mary Shelley was the first writer to discuss the possibilities of medicine, Greg Bear is one of the most recent. The modern view has become more optimistic since the early caution of Frankenstein.
We have been constrained by our limitations for hundreds of thousands of years. These limitations are about to fall away from us like scales from our eyes. And I think what we see and what we do will define a new kind of human being.
Science fiction has long had a vision of what our bodies may become. The super race. Super strong, super fast, super intelligent. They'll look like perfect versions of ourselves.
I think that within the next 50 years we'll have the choice to look any way we want. We'll be able to be tall and leggy and as graceful as antelopes. We'll be able to have feathers. We'll be able to have fur. We'll be able to change our sexuality. We might become in between sexes. Cosmetics, quite possible. Anything cosmetically you want to do. Any improvement, any health improvement, within 50 years we'll be able to do it.
After all, what we've achieved in the past 50 years would stun our ancestors. We now move living organs from person to person. Transplants of hearts, kidneys, lungs, eyes, and skin are among the incredible medical procedures that we now take for granted. Procedures that so far have been used exclusively for fixing people, but could become the basis for making superhumans. Joe Rosen rebuilds people. He's one of America's more experimental reconstructive plastic surgeons and has some revolutionary ideas about how surgery could be used to make normal people better.
What we've seen in the 20th century is a culmination of man repairing man and recreating what is considered normal. As we move into the 21st century, we'll look at how do we augment man.
What Rosen can do today is staggering enough. Take one of his first patients, Mark Pauline. On the outskirts of San Francisco, Pauline constructs robots and earns his living by running a robot circus. Some years ago, while Pauline was rehearsing for one of his performances, the robots hit back.
I met Joe Rosen back in 1982, but I met him in conjunction with an accident that occurred here. I was building dangerous rocket motors for a performance. One of them detonated when I was handling it incorrectly. It blew all the fingers off my hand except for this one. They took 2 toes off my feet. This is a small toe from one foot. This is a big toe from another foot. They grafted them on. Dr. Rosen was involved in nerves that were taken out of my legs, and they were used to bridge the nerves in my arm to the nerves in my fingers. It's functioned perfectly since 1983, and I've used it and abused it.
When I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being.
For the time being, surgeons like Rosen work on restoring damage by using existing parts of the body. Like Mark Pauline, this patient will have his own toes grafted onto his hand to act as fingers. But in the 21st century, it won't always be necessary to sacrifice other parts of the body or take organs from donors, because while surgeons like Dr. Rosen stand ready with their scalpels, other scientists are working on a way to provide them with body parts.
I engineer the bone for fingers.
I work on liver.
We grow nerves.
I engineer human ears.
Charles Vacanti is one of the pioneers of a remarkable new technology. He and a team of researchers from MIT are on the verge of achieving the seemingly impossible, engineering human body parts to order. Already, we have the technology to grow skin grafts in a laboratory. These scientists have gone even further. Their technique is based on seeding human cells into an artificial framework. As the cells divide, they grow into a living structure, as good as nature had intended. In this case, they've grown a human ear. But the work doesn't stop there. They're even hopeful of rebuilding complex organs like the liver, all grown to order from the patient's own healthy cells.
Any organ that you can think of that fails in the human body, and ultimately every organ in the human body fails, has the potential to become a tissue-engineered organ. I think that once we start putting these organs into humans and replacing lost function and prove that it is not only effective but safe, that it will change the way we practice medicine and the way physicians approach many, many diseases.
And if you think that this all sounds too much like science fiction, then take a look at this: the human ear grafted into a mouse. This experiment illustrates the advantage of this miraculous technology over transplants. Once the ear is grafted onto a patient, it grows with them. After this successful trial, the ear was removed and the mouse suffered no long-term effects.
I think there's always been an issue about whether or not we're allowed to go beyond what nature has set up as limits. I think when you look back at mythology, people were punished for trying to go beyond what was considered normal. And right now we're coming to a point that technically we can start to make things better than they were in design.
In fact, surgeons already have some bizarre ideas about the kinds of things we can do once we can build any part we want.
One of the thought experiments we do in plastic surgery is to think about how we could arrange the body to look at, could you make a man fly? And one of the things is looking at all the parts available, the biological parts, and moving them around to rearrange the human body to make it fly. So we'd make the arms a lot longer, we'd make them stronger, so that we're able to give somebody the ability to, one, take off, and two, is to glide.
So it seems we're finally heading towards a world where the body modifications dreamed of by Mary Shelley are possible. But tissue engineering and surgery may not be the most likely route. In 1953, two little-known scientists at Cambridge University made a discovery that the creator of Frankenstein could never have imagined. It turned the scientific world on its head. The scientists were Jim Watson and Francis Crick. Together, they discovered DNA.
I feel like Pygmalion. You build something beautiful, and it comes to life. All we wanted was the body, and we've got the soul. The secret of life itself. Peel the chains apart, and each chain reproduces the other. One becomes two, two becomes one, generation on generation, all the way from Adam and Eve to you and me. It's the closest we'll ever get to immortality, Jim.
DNA is the blueprint for organic life, and science fiction writers were quick to imagine its fantastic possibilities.
Well, in the beginning, all we could imagine were adding mechanical things to our bodies, because we didn't know the structure of DNA. It took people like Aldous Huxley, and then the science fiction stories in the magazines all started pushing us to think less about just plain mechanical add-ons, to think more about the organic changes from within, where you'd actually change the being that you were working with so that they might not be considered purely a human being anymore.
Genetic engineering is a brave new science, which hasn't yet been used on humans. But no one doubts we could if we wanted to. The door is open to make changes in humans as startling as those already made for animals.
We have created a fly with additional eyes on its legs and its wings, as well as its head.
Professor Walter Gehring is a genetic engineer at the University of Basel in Switzerland.
Some people thought scientists have nothing better to do than to create these monsters, and this is Frankenstein at its best, with the corresponding caricatures which appeared in the newspapers. On the other hand, there was a father who has two blind children and wants to support my research. We have isolated a master control gene from flies, which, when you turn this gene on in the wrong place in the fly, you can induce the formation of an extra eye on a wing or on a leg. And the astounding thing was that a single gene has so much power.
The red dots all over the bodies of these flies are indeed eyes. They are fully formed, but not connected up to the fly's brains. So, happily for their owners, cannot be used to see with. Professor Gehring has no immediate plans to take his work beyond flies, but the genetic material of humans could in theory be manipulated as dramatically as it has been for these flies.
In earlier times, before genetics were really understood, genetics was essentially fate. But now we can take, at least to some extent, we can take the genes into in our control and decide about our fate.
What is unacceptable to our generation might become acceptable to the next. They might choose to alter their genes to make themselves superhuman, but science fiction warns that we could end up creating monsters.
This presentation of Science Frontiers, Future Fantastic, is sponsored in part by IBM, Solutions for a Small Planet, and Plymouth, one clever idea after another. That's Plymouth.
You know what I'm sick of hearing about?
The internet.
The internet. What are you doing?
Surfing the web.
Nice hair. Solarized pictures of dead fat rock stars. UFOs. $1 zillion worth of technology, and what are we doing with it?
Browsing.
Here's an idea. Use the internet for something useful, like running a business, okay? All right? No kids, no chat rooms, no smiley face. Just raw, naked, in your face capitalism. You want to surf? Move to Maui.
If we don't dream of doing more, won't we just end up doing more of the same?
The Chrysler Sebring JXI convertible. Computer-controlled multi-valve engine, top-down self-equalizing stereo, race-inspired suspension, best convertible interior space. Now, the best-selling convertible, the Chrysler Sebring convertible. As far as it gets from more of the same. What's new in your world?
Tomorrow on Real History, he ruled Chicago's underworld, a polished gangster with a face for crime. Get inside the mafia with Al Capone on Rogues Gallery, tomorrow at 9 on TLC.
Tomorrow on Science Frontiers, this doctor's revolutionary vaccine is breaking new ground against cancer, arming some patients against the disease, offering new hope. Go on the front lines of the war on cancer, tomorrow at 10 on TLC.
Powerful, simpler, cleaner, quieter. Now there's a whole new way to mow your lawn. The Toro Carefree battery-powered mower. Call now for this free video that shows you more about this whole new way to mow. Call 1-800-841-3669. The Toro Carefree is simple. To start, just press the button, hold the lever, and go. The Toro Carefree is quiet, 75% quieter than the average gas mower. The Toro Carefree is clean, does away with gas, oil, and exhaust emissions. See all the details in this free video. Call 1-800-841-3669. If you can cut your lawn in under 2 hours, the Toro Carefree has all the power you need to cut your lawn on a single charge. Discover the whole new way to mow your lawn. The Toro Carefree mower. The power you need, yet simpler, cleaner, and quieter. Call 1-800-841-3669.
The rain pattered dismally against the panes. My candle was nearly burned out. When by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open.
The relevance of Frankenstein to modifying our bodies is that it's a tragedy. It's a willingness to be creative and to change things, and then a backing away, a failure of will or responsibility to follow through with it. This is what creates monsters, is the inability to become a good parent when you have your technology, and not to raise that technology properly, not to give it the good guidance that's necessary to make it fulfill its promise. If you back away from your task too early, then you simply have an abandoned child, and that's what the Frankenstein's monster is.
How do you do? I'm Victor Frankenstein.
The stories reach the same conclusion. If we dare to play God, we invite catastrophe. The question is, will that stop us?
I think we're going to modify our bodies. I think we're going to do it for the sake of our kids, because we're going to want them to be better. If we won't do it for ourselves, we won't try to stop them from being better. And the question then becomes, what kind of generation gap will we deal with when our children stop looking like us? When they have their own choices, they can stop being limited by their genetic variations. They can be handsomer than the material we gave them.
Bruce Sterling, another best-selling author, believes vanity will be the main reason we'll embrace this new technology.
What I think you're actually going to see is a situation like a cocktail party, and a woman arrives, she's charming. She moves like a prima ballerina, and she's very good looking. And the men gravitate to her, and the women bite their lips in envy, and one looks to the other and says, you know, who is that who just came in? And says, well, that's Agnes. She's been to Cyprus. She had some things done in the lab. At that point, you reach a watershed. The person looks at that and says, well, what did she do, and how do I do it? And not only that, but you can recognize that what she has is like worth selling your house for. That's when it actually hits, you see. That's when it begins to really permeate. It's like hitting people on an extremely intimate level.
After all, thousands of perfectly healthy people already choose to undergo extensive and costly surgery with the aim of improving themselves. We may just be looking at the beginning.
In Beverly Hills, in California in general, it's like taking your car in for a 40,000-mile service or a 50,000-mile service. It's expected, it's not looked down upon, and people realize just as if they take their car in, they have it serviced regularly, if they have themselves serviced regularly and they look good, they realize that they'll function better because your image, the way you see yourself, the way you feel about yourself, determines how you function in all other facets of life.
And if people are willing to pay $25,000 to have the wrinkles removed from their foreheads, what will they be willing to pay for stronger limbs, long-lasting hearts, or even more intelligence? Could these changes, too, become as straightforward as taking your car in for a rehaul?
It will be done to suit normal ambitions by normal people. Eventually, we'll get used to it. People will get used to it in the way they get used to crossing the Atlantic in 8 hours, or hearing the recorded voices of dead human beings, or watching videotape. I mean, these are all things which were tremendous violations at one point, just seemed outlandish and unreal. Well, to the people who are doing them, they won't be outlandish. The outlandishness will fade, and once it fades, then it will become a normal mass market technology. It won't be human, but it'll be very real.
Each human's going to want a different product, and the goal of the physician is to help that person build themselves into that human they want to be. It's a very individual thing. And I think as we move forward in the 21st century, we're going to see people becoming more and more specialized as individuals than we've seen before.
There will be such a thing as an artificial human being, and they will walk among us, and they will be us, and we will be them. And they will not allow themselves to be called artificial beings, and nobody will call them that because they won't look artificial. They're going to look glamorous.
Max and Nancy Moore are the founders of the Extropians, a group of people waiting to be turned into superhumans. From their beachfront home in Los Angeles, they publish Extropy, a monthly magazine that details current scientific research into improving human bodies. They have some 5,000 subscribers.
Extropians are people who look at the human body and say, what an incredible marvel of nature this is, but can't we do a little bit better? After all, nature didn't have any intelligence, it didn't have any plan in mind when it designed us, so I think humans can do a little better. We can become something more than human by applying science and technology to changing the body into the form we want. We have a certain set of genes in our body, a certain structure that we've evolved to have, and it limits us in various ways. We can't see very well, we can't see in infrared or ultraviolet. Our bones get broken and crushed very easily. We age and die in about 100 years or so. And all these things are completely unacceptable to extropians. We want to live longer than that. We want to change our bodies so that they're harder, stronger, more resilient, so they're potentially immortal, at least live as long as possible.
Immortality. After all, it would be the ultimate proof that we had become superhuman.
I want to be able to choose when I die, if ever, and so far, I don't really expect to ever choose to die.
I'd like to start the rejuvenation process. I'd like to start growing younger.
Eternal youth. Medicine's mastery of aging. It's one of science fiction's oldest fantasies. It looks forward to a time when lifespans are measured in centuries, not decades, and where an electronic afterlife awaits us when our bodies have died. Now scientists are starting to unravel the secrets of aging. Could we see a day when these things are possible? When we witness the death of death itself?
It may be very expensive and it may take a long time to conquer death, but it's worth it. I don't care how long it takes or how much science it takes. Once you know how to do it, it will get cheaper like everything else.
Marvin Minsky, world-renowned scientist and visionary.
Try to face the issue. 100 years is a nice long time, but it's not long enough for a human. Even if a human lives twice as long as its closest relative, a chimpanzee, it's not long enough. We deserve to live 500 years, and everybody should be quite angry about not doing it. Here's your chance.
Come. I will show you what no other living mortal has seen. The flame of eternal life.
Immortality, one of mankind's greatest dreams, and yet the most elusive. But in science fiction, it's easy. In the book She, by Rider Haggard, all you have to do is walk into a blue flame.
Science fiction treats immortality as something achievable through something like the elixir of life. It's alchemy.
John Clute is the author of the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction.
Since we don't really know how to extend our natural lifespan, the explanations given to longevity or to immortality in science fiction tend to be potions, injections, magic elixirs, leaps into faith.
Meanwhile, back in the real world, scientists have been busy creating their own elixirs and potions, promising to make us young again.
I use liver, brain, spinal cord, heart, kidney, mixed with juices of raw vegetables that fixed up gray hair, wrinkles, bad teeth, sagging chin, brittle nails. If somebody has sex problem, your worries are over.
Just about everything has been tried, from rat's testicles to monkey glands. And just about everyone has tried them. Gloria Swanson, Salvador Dali, and even Winston Churchill put their faith in these so-called elixirs. Today, eternal youth is as compelling an idea as ever, and we'll still try anything to get it.
My life extension program begins with ageless thinking. It's a psychology that helps me maintain a youthfulness and to grow younger. I work out, body build, plenty of water, nutritious diet, vitamins, supplements.
Apart from vitamins, we take things like coenzyme Q10, and considering things like DHEA and various other substances that might reverse the decline in the immune system as I age.
But maybe it's not what we put in our bodies which will keep us young, but what we don't put in. It's the latest thinking on life extension. These mice will live twice as long as other mice. They're not taking special pills or potions. They're simply eating a lot less food. It's called caloric restriction. Experiments show it extends life in animals, though no one knows for sure that it works for humans. But some people aren't waiting for proof. They're already trying out this more homely approach to living longer.
Our staple lunch diet is sweet potato and corn and lettuce. What we put on lettuce varies. Sometimes when we're in a hurry or in a rush, we may just have a lot of lettuce.
Rima and Malcolm Greenhill are following a restricted diet for the rest of their lives, in the hope of living longer.
I have a computer program, and I've actually inputted all of everything we eat
It's not just calorie restriction. It's calorie restriction with optimal nutrition. Very important. This is not a starvation diet.
In fact, scientists believe that if people were to reduce their calorie intake by a third, we could see lifespans of up to 140. Maybe it's worth trying until something better comes along.
There is a distinct possibility that we are the last generation to live a normal lifespan. Wouldn't it be dreadful if I died just before all these developments came through?
Dieting and pills may buy us a few extra years, maybe even decades. But if we want to extend our lives dramatically, then we'll need to transform the genetics of the human body. Science will have to rewrite the book of life. Joseph Klein is 96 years old. His brother Eugene is 98. Their parents and grandparents also lived to be very old. Could it be that the secret of long life is in our genes?
You want to talk about the web? Let's talk about Jack Webb.
You want to tell us a little more about that?
Let's talk about security on the web. You know there are over 50 million people on the web, and they're not all nice.
Liars, cheats.
Imagine living in a neighborhood where the worst traffic you encounter is a
Jack, here's lunch.
Thanks.
How's business?
Not bad. Yours?
It's okay. Hey, what's up?
Incredible feats of strength and cunning, impossible to perform. Beauty and glamour, fame and fortune, impossible to obtain. But now, the tricks of the trade are exposed, and the experts show you how it's really done.
You have to have certain edges.
No, there's nothing wrong with being rich.
Secrets revealed, tonight beginning at 9 on TLC. Adventures for your mind.
In Methuselah's Children, Robert Heinlein tells the story of a people who were bred to live for hundreds of years. Maybe it's not such an impossible idea.
Mankind will postpone human aging substantially in the future, doubling human lifespan at least. When we've accomplished this, we would be ashamed that we didn't work on it much sooner.
Michael Rose, an evolutionary biologist following in the footsteps of science fiction.
I read this book called Methuselah's Children by Robert A. Heinlein probably when I was 12, and it's hilarious for me now because in this book there's kind of a parable of my whole career.
The extraordinary lifespans of Methuselah's children were acquired by selectively breeding men and women over generations. Rose has been doing his own breeding experiments to increase longevity, not with humans, but with flies. Rose bred together strains of flies that reproduced late in life. After generations of breeding, he'd created a superfly, living twice as long as its ancestors.
The fact that we were easily able to mold aging in fruit flies tells us that, in principle at least, you could easily mold human aging.
And Rose believes that we can't start soon enough.
I've been working away for 20 years on making flies happier and longer lived. Meanwhile, in barbaric splendor around me are people aging at an appalling rate, racing toward the grave.
So what can we do for humans? Selective breeding would take hundreds of years. But there's a quicker way. If our lifespan is written into our DNA, maybe we can rewrite it. As unbelievable as this sounds, it's already been done. Thanks to genetic engineering, these worms will live 6 times as long as nature intended. The biologist who achieved this was Siegfried Hakimi.
we've discovered a number of genes which, when altered, makes the worm live long.
Hakimi has found nothing less than the gene which controls the biological clock. To produce a longer life, he reset the clock.
It's very likely that humans have some form of biological clock which regulates everything, the rate at which they do things, and there will be genes which of course, with activity, will regulate, will allow this mechanism to function properly. We have not found them in humans yet, but that might come soon.
Especially if Dr. Francois Schechter has anything to do with it.
Well, one day, it may become possible that we don't have to worry about dying any longer. An organism is made of clocks that are constantly ticking all cycles, interprime cycles, and we want to understand why the organism has these daily cycles, monthly cycles, and how the lifespan is determined.
Schechter's team have an extraordinary resource at their disposal: the DNA of 500 long-lived families. If the genes for long life are anywhere, they're in this blood bank. And if Schechter manages to find them, the implications would be earth-shattering. At long last, the lifespans of science fiction would be ours for the taking.
If we understand the intrinsic clock of aging, then we should be able to slow it down to a great extent, and perhaps to live a few centuries.
Think about it. Many of us alive today might live until the 22nd century. And theoretically, we could engineer a new generation with lifespans of 300 to 400 years. But science fiction has never liked this idea.
I have an absolutely horrific sense of what might happen if, say, we were able to live 200 years. The only thing you can do with old people who are extremely wise and powerful is boot them into space, where they can find new worlds to conquer.
But some are a little more positive.
I think until recently, most science fiction writers have seen longevity as a bad thing because of lack of imagination. Essentially, they've projected this condition we're in as lasting for millions of years without changing. Well, of course, that will be boring, but that's not what's going to happen. We're going to leave the planet, we'll change our physical form, and I think the number of lifestyles we can have is infinite.
Despite the optimism of the scientists, there's no guarantee that it'll happen in our lifetimes. But if you want to make sure you're around when it does, you'll have to put life on hold. It could be a long, cold wait if you decide to have your body frozen.
I predict that within the next couple of centuries at most, our patients in cryonic suspension will be revived and rejuvenated to live and love again for as long as they choose.
Dr. Robert Ettinger, pioneer of the cryonics movement.
And then, of course, the idea of freezing people for eventual revival in various forms is very old, but the particular story that I noticed was in the 30s. A story about a Professor Jameson called the Jameson Satellite.
In the depths of space, some 20,000 miles from the Earth, the body of Professor Jameson cruised upon an endless journey, circling the gigantic sphere.
In this science fiction tale, Professor Jameson remains frozen in space for millions of years until he is discovered by an alien race and revived.
It was immediately obvious to me that the author had missed the main point of his own story, because if it made any sense to expect the possibility of eventual rescue by aliens, then why not rescue our own people very soon?
In his book, The Prospect of Immortality, Ettinger sets out his own ideas for preserving the human race, freezing them in liquid nitrogen.
When I wrote The Prospect of Immortality, I was merely expressing ideas that seemed obvious to me and had seemed obvious since my childhood, but they were not obvious, apparently, to most people. That we had within our power to create the greatest revolutions in human history, to do away with death and dying, and to become superhuman if we chose to do so.
It was a revolution that people were only too willing to be a part of. Suddenly, everyone was demanding to know where they could sign up to be frozen. One of them was Professor James Bedford, and when he died, he became the first person ever to take this great step into the unknown. His body is now lying in suspension in a vault alongside 31 other hopeful immortals.
When I'm in here, and I think about the people in here, I know that some of these are people that I have known.
Steve Bridge, president of Alcor.
What I feel is sort of like a caretaker. We're taking care of these people. We still call them patients. And that's the way I feel. It's more like an intensive care unit in a hospital. Maybe you can't see that the person is still there, but you know the possibility is still there that they're going to wake up someday.
But Professor Bedford has been lying here for 30 years. What are his chances of returning to the land of the living? According to some people, slim.
I really think that I could freeze my mother-in-law with the greatest of ease. The only thought that gives me pause is what will happen when she thaws.
Cryobiologist Mike Taylor is skeptical about the revival of the frozen dead.
Freezing is easy. The crucial question is the feasibility of reversing the freezing process. My personal opinion is that it's no more than a fanciful piece of science fiction or act of faith. If you were to go and look inside the body, what you would find is a devastating array of injury.
Injury caused by the tiny ice crystals which form in the frozen tissue, tearing at cell linings and rupturing blood vessels.
There is no way of conceiving that those blood vessels could ever carry blood around the body again.
It's certainly true that the people frozen here have had additional damage from the freezing damage. But it's also very likely that the future repair capabilities will be an immeasurable amount better than what we have today.
Today's cryonics patients are relying on tomorrow's medicine, nanotechnology. It's the science of minute machines which will be able to go where no machines have ever gone before.
I think nanotechnology is the ultimate science fiction dream of the next century. If you could make little machines that are about the same size as the cells of your body, and in principle this looks possible, then you could repair almost every kind of biological damage. One of the fantasies about nanotechnology in the future is that you'll be able to inject swarms of these very small repair machines which can creep around in your body and fix things that look wrong.
And if this miniature medicine works on living bodies, could it work for the frozen?
I think it likely will be able to revive patients who have been cryonically suspended under favorable conditions sometime in the next century.
Ralph Merkel, nanotechnologist at the Xerox Corporation.
My expectation is that the level of damage caused by freezing is extensive, does extend to the cellular level and very likely the molecular level. But clearly in the future, with molecular nanotechnology, we should be able to reverse freezing injury, or at least the kind of freezing injury that occurs in cryonic suspensions.
So the future's looking brighter for these patients all the time. So bright that even Ralph Merkel is banking on it.
I am signed up with Alcor to be cryonically suspended, and indeed I have an appropriate bracelet. It says, if you find me in a non-functional condition, then please contact Alcor as quickly as possible.
Ralph, can you hear me? Ralph?
But once we've repaired the body and brain, will we be able to bring back the mind? Gregory Benford, physics professor and science fiction writer with a personal interest in cryonics.
I've contracted to have my head preserved. True. And that's actually not even very expensive. You can do it with a life insurance policy that will cost you $1,000 a year for about 15 years or so. But I look upon it as a long shot, a low probability answer to the problem of death.
When we put him under, he stopped counting at 12. If the brain mechanism's undamaged, it should pick up his last memory pattern, and he'll go on counting from where he left off. Philip, are you with us?
When you warm people back up again, if it was Fred going in, you boot it up, it's Fred coming back at about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. He wakes up again. Then he has Fred's memory, and he has his same disagreeable personality, and the whole thing.
You're ready, just go on counting. It's all under control, Philip.
I mean, that's what you do every morning when you wake up, is that you reboot your consciousness program from the unconsciousness program.
30, 40.
If you can save the brain, you can save the memory.
16.
It might be a century, it might be 2. But when these hopeful immortals are finally unfrozen, will the wait have been worthwhile? Will they wake to find their dream has finally come true?